Good afternoon. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I am delighted to welcome you to our Thought Leaders webinar on the race to adaptable, flexible and resilient cities and infrastructure. I'm Alicia Prince, the General Manager of the Victorian Division of Engineers Australia. In keeping with our custom, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to them and their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. The pace of change has never been this fast, yet it will never be this slow again. We build our cities and infrastructure for the future, and ensuring they are adaptable, flexible and resilient allows us to maximise the opportunities and navigate the challenges in a changing world. I'd like to recognise that today's webinar is being hosted with Engineers Australia's industry partner Siemens. Siemens is a global technology powerhouse that started its Australian operations in 1872, celebrating their 150th anniversary this year and their 175th anniversary globally. Active around the world, the company brings together the digital and physical worlds to benefit customers and society and focuses on the area of industry, infrastructure, mobility and healthcare. I'm now pleased to introduce our guest speakers for this afternoon. Matthias Rebellius is the Global CEO of Siemens Smart Infrastructure and a member of the Managing Board of Siemens. In his role as CEO of Smart Infrastructure, Matthias Rebellius leads a business of 70,000 employees worldwide who share the aim of increasing performance, reliability and sustainability across energy systems, buildings and industries. Dr. Bronwyn Evans is the chair of the Building 4.0 CRC, which aims to develop an internationally competitive, dynamic and thriving Australian advanced building and infrastructure sector by applying the principles from the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Her career highlights include having been the CEO of Engineers Australia, the CEO of Standards Australia and a member of the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 Task Force. Peter Halliday is Chairman and CEO of Siemens in Australia and New Zealand. In his 24 years at Siemens, Peter has been involved in some of the most important building infrastructure projects in the world and most recently led Siemens global operations for building performance and sustainability. Finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Keith Ritchie. Keith is the Head of Communications and Government Affairs for Siemens in Australia and the Pacific region and has been instrumental in driving thought leadership in the country in areas such as green hydrogen, digitalization and Industry 4.0. Please welcome Matthias Rebellius, Dr. Bronwyn Evans, Peter Halliday and Keith Ritchie.
Okay, thanks Alicia, appreciate that introduction and thanks for Engineers Australia for hosting such an important event today. We have a real stellar lineup with us, with Matthias and with Bronwyn and Peter. The topic is critically important in so many different ways and interestingly enough, engineers and technology are so important to solve most of the greatest challenges that we face in the world today. Matthias, I'm going to open with a question to you. I was reading an article earlier in the year where you talked about adaptable infrastructure and the need for this. Can you help us understand what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the question. And Keith, it is about that, you know, as much as the world is changing, also the infrastructure has to change. And this is for different reasons. We asked, we had a survey being made also with a global survey with customers and also with stakeholders and said, okay, the need for change is really increasing in terms of how buildings are being used, how they are structured, and that is related to the pandemic, but also the new way we work and live, and also the requirements of technology and to make better use of our resources. So adaptability is about also making flexible use and taking existing infrastructure without building new ones and then rebuilding, refurnish, and make them adaptable or make changes really quickly.
Thank you. Bronwyn, the Building 4.0 CRC, can you help us understand how that came about? And are you seeing through that work any parallels to what Matthias just mentioned about the need for adaptable infrastructure?
Yeah, so the CRCs, if I can just say as a program, is really about solving industry-led problems. And it's doing that by bringing together industry and researchers and academia. So how do we make sure that we're solving the right problems? And some of those problems are all about adaptability and flexibility, and it also goes beyond and looks at some of the other critical topics around buildings of waste and waste in all manner right across the supply chain. So absolutely, the sorts of problems that we've been set up to solve are those very ones around adaptability, flexibility.
Yeah. And Matthias, you're not the only person who's visiting us from overseas. Peter actually has recently started as the CEO of Siemens Australia, but Peter, you've spent the last couple of decades working across Asia and Europe. Are you seeing any projects, or did you see any projects where this adaptability or smart infrastructure has really resonated with you?
Yeah, so having worked in Asia and then lately in Switzerland and having a global role, I was very fortunate to be across quite a few projects. And one recently that comes to mind is a partnership we've done with University of Birmingham in the UK, where we've implemented IoT sensor technology and an analytics platform to be able to provide the university with the insights for space utilization and going down the path of having the smartest building concept for the university. So the first stage is understanding the data that we can capture, and then the next stage will be making the campus sustainable and resilient for energy efficiency.
Well, I guess the university is one of those places where you are expecting to be smart and generate, stimulate, new talent from. So it's important to have the infrastructure that's also smart.
And part of that partnership is setting up a lab, a learning lab, and build a syllabus around it so we can set up a program for the students of the university.
Okay. Matthias, it's been an interesting couple of years around the world, and flying to Australia is almost a new experience again, that sort of movement taking place. Now, cities around the world really didn't trust the infrastructure, the buildings that we had during COVID. And so we started to shut down our cities as a way of managing COVID. And as we open up, I guess we've got to understand, are we learning anything from the past? Have you seen a difference from that?
Yeah, of course, many things are different, and also experienced myself and all of us. Also, you mentioned the travel. It's really the first time here since COVID, and it's just starting. And we learned also a different way of working, a different way of doing things more digital. And so digitalization definitely become a booster in the pandemic, but also in the way using digital technologies and traveling less, which is also helping then the environment again. So there's always something positive also in all of the crises if we make it right, if we have some learnings. I would not necessarily say per se that we didn't trust our buildings or our cities or the authorities. There were good reasons or no other means at that time other than doing the lockdowns. But I think we learned something out of it. And when I talk about adaptability and flexibility before, digitalization is the enabler. Digitalization became a boost during the pandemic. So that is something that will remain and it will continue. And it will also enable us to deliver on more efficient and effective infrastructure, which is then also more resilient at the end, by leveraging the digital technologies better and smarter.
Are there any examples of where we did use digital technologies, even at Siemens, to help manage the work, the flow of people in and out of buildings or things like that?
Yeah, definitely. So we do it on our own. For example, we bought Comfy and a workspace application also, which we have now rolled out in 600 of our buildings globally. And it's kind of funny, it's funny. It's a fact that the algorithms of the Comfy app were built to manage space more effectively, which means bring as many as possible people into areas, make the space best utilized, monitor people flows in shopping malls or airports for these particular reasons. And with the pandemic, we had to turn these algorithms upside down and say, how can we bring as much as allowed only so many people as allowed into a building.
So what? 1 minute it's 25%. The next week it's
and
50%.
then it's over. Then you cannot book a desk there because this building is already crowded, or you have to go somewhere else. So making use of this is just one small example. But there's many more, of course.
Yeah. So Bronwyn and Peter, heaven forbid, if we had a pandemic tomorrow and it was a different type of pandemic and we don't have a vaccine for 2 years, where do you think Australia sits in terms of our cities and infrastructure?
And I think it's a good point that at the time this most recent pandemic hit, the only tool available to us was isolation and separation. And as we learnt more about the behaviour of the pathogen, the virus, we could respond and we came up with vaccines. So I think we need to learn and be willing to learn quickly and bring the public along on that journey, because we now know the role of air conditioning and the role of the movement of air and how many people you have in a location is really important. The next virus that comes along may have really different behaviour. So we've got to learn to adapt and to keep that continuous mindset of learn, test, build trust, be transparent. So it's not so much about the technologies available to us, because as you said, you could change the algorithms when you found out what are the parameters. So it's the same. We've got to bring more a whole way of thinking and transparency of information so that people have confidence that the decisions that are made are then going to keep them safe.
Yeah. Peter, what could we do differently there?
Look, I think we have learned a lot from the last pandemic. Are we ready for the next one? God forbid. I think we've got learnings there. Obviously we know that UV filtration works by knocking out the virus. We also know that the role of relative humidity takes, 40 to 60% is the band where it reduces the impact of the virus, if it is a similar virus. But digitalization, and Matthias touched on it, it allowed us to play with algorithms that actually we can remotely connect to buildings, like an algorithm that we developed, DVO, dynamic air volume, where we're able to remotely control the building to make it 40 to 60 degrees relative humidity, and also allowing more fresh air into it. As ASHRAE has now addressed the standards of airflow in buildings, we don't have to go in and hard code buildings. We could digitally, remotely connect into them to make them ready.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's a good case for more digitalisation and rapidly digitalising as much of the building and cities and infrastructure as we can. Matthias, the focus in Europe at the moment on energy and energy prices, it's quite a difficult time. Have you seen, I guess, more of a focus on the demand side as a result to try and get the costs down and the efficiencies up?
Yes, and actually it's already the second time that demand becomes more at the forefront of the discussions, because the first one, when we talk about the energy transition that was being discussed in every country, but especially in Germany and Europe, in the first wave, they forgot about the importance of demand optimization, because every kilowatt hour that is not being consumed does not need to be produced. That sounds pretty simple, but that's now known and also taken into consideration. And now even more, of course, for with the war in Ukraine and the impacts also on the gas supply in Europe and Germany, there's uncertainty about it, and there's a lot of discussions about where to source, how to source. But also there, people all of a sudden talk about, we need to have 15% less energy consumption in the industry and also in public households. You can do a lot with being more mindful with what you do, but you can even do more. And we discussed it this morning also here about that almost in each and every sector you can achieve savings of 20-25% with the latest technology and making better use of the existing infrastructure. So a clear yes, demand optimization and reduction is a key for success in this regard, and also supported by the the fast, I must say, decision from the European Union and the Council for the Repower Europe initiative. So joining forces and new sources for energy generation, but also and pushing renewables, of course, as well as reducing demand. So,
is there any policies that you might have seen introduced in Europe in the last while that would drive better outcomes around demand side?
Yeah, it's the European Building Directive, definitely, which has now brought it to the next level, which is enabling this. But I think it's not only about regulations. It's also about, creating awareness, and that is what we, as the industry leaders, but also the governments, and also this is everybody in his own responsibility has to do, that we increase the awareness of what needs to be done, but are very appreciative of the directions as well.
Yeah. Peter, earlier in October, you actually opened the National Energy Efficiency Summit in Sydney. And I remember one of the topics you talked about was the connection between the need to digitalise more industry and actually achieving net zero. Can you help us understand what are the sort of things, why are those two things connected, digitalisation and achieving net zero in industry in particular?
Well, they do go hand in hand, and we've experienced that with our customers around the globe, where automation and software will improve the efficiency of a facility, a manufacturing facility. But it's also, as Matthias said, looking at the supply side and demand side, and that's a holistic view of automation, software, energy, supply and demand, and also looking at your supply chain, which will help you become overall more energy efficient. And I think it's that holistic view that you need to look at. Okay.
Bronwyn, you've had a strong background in Industry 4.0. You were certainly a core founding member of the Prime Minister's Industry 4.0 task force, particularly in one of your previous jobs as the CEO of Sanders Australia. What do you think we could learn from Industry 4.0, Germany's approach to this? Is there something that we can learn in the broader context of infrastructure and energy efficiency?
I think there absolutely is, as the top of the question and the answer. The hallmark of success for the German Industry 4.0 were around, it was a national priority, and therefore it attracted investment and intention. And then there was a clear framework, and I think that's one of the other reasons why it's been successful and integrated. And there were 6 working groups that really addressed those critical things. And it brought together 3 essential groups. It brought together the researchers, that sort of idea development. It brought together industry who could test and implement. And importantly, it brought together the unions, so the employees as well. So I think for me, what we can learn is it needs to be a national priority. It needs to have a clear framework, and it needs to bring everyone together. And whether you're talking about Industry 4.0 or Building 4.0 or resilient and adaptable cities, you can't do it piecemeal and think you're going to be successful and achieve big outcomes.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Matthias, do you see that sort of framework in place being it's probably more standard in Europe, but we look at it as being really innovative, something that we can learn from Europe. How does that mindset come about?
Yeah, normally, if I travel around globally, I don't say the one should learn from the other, but sharing experience is definitely important. And also the situations are also different. If you look into, for example, in Asia, we have a lot more new build infrastructure, while in Europe is facing a lot of brownfield upgrades in infrastructure. And so therefore, I think the learnings that we have to apply is important. When you talk about the framework, I would say most important is also if we want to digitalizing the infrastructure to make it more sustainable. And I said this earlier today, the one doesn't go without the other. So we need to digitalize to be able to work with the increasing complexity. and then drive sustainability. And this is different, of course, if you are in a brownfield, in a greenfield environment, if you have lots of sun and wind power available as you have perhaps more here, or if you have hydroelectric power like in Switzerland, where my hometown is, for example.
Can I explore an idea, please? Matthias, you mentioned the digitalization. What about the skills to be able to, take that and integrate it into the way people work or businesses? What have you learned, and what could you share with us about that skill development and skill building?
Yeah, so it's first we have as an industry which is evolving, from the building industry, it has totally changed from bricks and glass and some automation now to become an IT and IoT driven industry. This is, and we're not done yet, by the way. This is of course increasing the demand also on higher level skill sets on IT and software knowledge on our employees, but also on the customer side. So therefore, if we bring up these talents, we also need to make sure that our customers also have equally an understanding of what we do. So IT competence is important. We are competing there with other companies and other industries, of course, which are perceived to be, on the first view, more interesting. But we do have a purpose in what we do, because what we discussed before in sustainability is what we as an industry enable with digitalization. Therefore, it's so important to also join the industries and join as an engineer also with interest in digitalization.
Mm-hmm. And so you sort of talking about that real skill coupling, and you also talk about digital sector coupling. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it might sound a little different, because we were talking about sector coupling a lot, but now we talk about digital sector coupling. And this is because the data needs to be analyzed and worked with, and decisions being drawn out of, regardless where the data is coming from. So from different sectors, be it from industry, from infrastructure, from healthcare, from food and beverage, transportation, weather data, and so all sorts of data coming together in one data lake and then being processed. This is what I call digital sector coupling. And then, of course, the question comes: who owns the data? Who is responsible for it? And as we said, to draw the right conclusions for infrastructure, we don't have to own the data, and we don't have to have personalized data, because that is scaring always people when they hear about IoT and connected devices, and people say, I don't want to be a connected device, even though we all are, if we look into our phones and smartwatches and the like. But I just want to make that clear. We don't need personalized data to do this.
Peter, I want to bring back to that discussion about getting the buildings healthier, if you like, more resilient to COVID. And at the same time, we're trying to use buildings to achieve net zero. And it seems to me that they're almost opposing forces, because you want the windows open, you want more fresh air, you're probably running more heating, more cooling at those times to manage the airflows. Is there a way that we can bring this together and do both at the same time, achieve net zero with our buildings and have them more healthy and more resilient?
Yeah, I think the first thing is each building is its own individual footprint, and taking that holistic view of looking at indoor air quality is very important, making sure you've got the right airflows, using sensible engineering practices, outside air cycles when the air is, the cooling is available outside. But a lot of the demand side applications to make a building more efficient today are available. And, most buildings are over-engineered for that one day of the year that there's going to be extreme temperatures. So the chillers are over-designed, for example. So having the right algorithms to make sure that the chiller is operating, or maybe instead of 4, but 3 or 2 at the right time, but getting the peak efficiency out of them, that's good engineering practices. So it's a balance between a healthy environment in a building, but then also making sure that the building is performing most optimally. And then if you bring the supply side piece into it, putting some PV on the roof, making sure that's connected in with some battery storage, can also shave a peak off the energy spend, which then will also reduce your carbon footprint.
Which, if I may add, is also a good example in terms when we talk about flexibility and adaptability. You know, these days when especially office buildings are not fully used and fully utilized for obvious reasons, and if then a building like a high-rise tower is being filled just opportunistically, you might not optimize the energy consumption. So if you fill it organized with a workspace application, for example, and guide people to the same floors or the right floors, you can manage the crowd, and you can also manage then which area is being cooled or heated, which saves a tremendous amount of energy.
Seems like common sense.
It does, but it's not so easy because and in times where still is being heated and the window is open at the same time, that's happening every single day as we speak. It's not implemented yet. Yeah.
I remember as a kid being told to put a jumper on instead of turn the heater up.
Yeah.
Bronwyn, for decades in Australia, the construction industry has struggled with rising costs and low margins. We've talked about the role of smart infrastructure technology in operating buildings. Is there more of a role in the construction phase also?
There certainly is, and I think one of the things about rising cost is a lot of those costs, as we have spoken about even this morning, is right across the supply chain, and there's a lot of waste, so we need to take waste out of that supply chain, and we can take waste out of that supply chain by using some of those Industry 4.0 principles about manufacturability, around digitalization and understanding, but also around the whole operational side of the business, the building once it's constructed. Are we designing for maintainability? Are we designing for the use of the building? So we've got to think differently about buildings. We've done it with critical devices, whether it's in medical devices. We're now talking about design for manufacturability, design for usability. We can apply those principles into construction, which we haven't done. We make a joke in the Building 4.0 CRC that if you were a Roman builder and came onto a site now, you pretty much would get a gig at a building site anywhere, because we're still basically doing things the way we've done them for thousands of years. The opportunity is to be much more innovative. That's available to us.
And digitalisation, I guess, plays an important part in this. I know Matthias and Peter Siemens, we always talk about digitalisation. We have a lot of businesses really focused on that. But I also notice there's been a number of acquisitions in this space this year. Can you help us understand what were the acquisitions and which parts of the gap do they help fill?
Yeah, so of course, if there's a huge trend in the industry and there's a transformation and to be faster, so you partner with other companies or you acquire them. That's pretty normal. That's what we also do to have our own investments, but also accommodate this with acquisitions. On speaking about the most recent one, which is a very important one for the building space that we're talking about here, is Brightly. So we acquired Brightly as a leading software as a service company out of the United States in North Carolina. And they are one of the leaders in asset and maintenance management, which is definitely then a phase where we talk about beyond building management. So I always say we are managing buildings in the vertical space since decades, but as the majority of cost and also maintenance and also the carbon footprint is being created in the operations, we have to go around this phase. And now with the software, we are working on a common data lake, and then Brightly energy and asset management software is definitely helping us also in optimizing the operations of the infrastructure and buildings.
Is that almost, am I right in saying it's like a digital twin of the asset management, or not quite?
It is connecting to a digital twin. So a digital twin is something that we need for more than just the asset management or the maintenance management. It's also about the other operational or building management, but also for security, for crowd management, and the like. But they use the same set of data, and then optimize asset and maintenance management.
Okay. Peter and possibly Bronwyn on this one as well. Digitalization has an enormous amount of promise. We talk about it a lot, but we also know it can be quite difficult for companies to really latch on and digitalize and go down that path. How can Australian companies accelerate their digitalization journeys?
You can start.
Pointing at each other here.
Having come back from Europe the last few months and taking on my new role, I've been able to visit a few of the Australian companies, everything from a small microbrewery to a large food and beverage industry supplier. And everyone's on a different journey. You know, this brewery that we went to, fully automated from top to bottom, everything from, you know, warehouse logistics to an EPR system, you know, at the front of house, fully automated. Embracing digital technologies. And then you have small microbreweries that they don't know where to start, and they can't afford to bring a consultant to come in and sell them all the wares. So my advice to the industry would be, it's a step-by-step approach. Find a trusted advisor to start the journey. You got to start on that journey of digitalization now, because you're going to get left behind. If we think of the carbon neutral targets that that are going to be pushed onto the supply chain, you got to make sure the product you're building and to sell is got a carbon neutral footprint, or the supermarkets won't allow you to stock that product. So they need to start the journey now.
Bronwyn?
I think there's another element too. There are companies with that capability, but the procurement and contractual processes don't recognise that particular skill. And I think there's something to be done on the procurement side and for very large infrastructure. That's often government. So I think there is a role for government in procurement to recognise the value in digitalisation and factor that into the sort of contracting. And Peter's exactly right. I'm also involved with some smaller manufacturers who are going on that digitalisation journey. And it's exciting. They start very quickly to see the tangible benefits that you get. Suddenly you're clearing out, 30% of your footprint becomes available for the next line when you thought you had to build a building. So the benefits become really tangible really quickly. And I'd like to know about that microbrewery. Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll connect up later.
Thank you.
Have a visit there.
One of the things I read about recently, I think I saw you cutting a ribbon or something, Matthias, was Wunsiedel. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Wunsiedel, yes.
Wunsiedel. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why were you cutting a ribbon? What's important about that project?
Yeah. For the ones most likely from further away from Wunsiedel, this is a small town in Bavaria, in Germany, which has started an incredible journey almost 10 years ago and making a decision, okay, they want to be front runner in terms of being independent from net zero and energy independent. So they started with renewable energy, of course, solar and wind and biomass, and then they had Siemens as a technology partner, connecting all of these assets and making them best way to operate. We did the electrification, the automation, and the digitalization of all of this infrastructure, and working together with them. And then they needed storage, so we put battery storage in. And so the one step after the other. And the recent step that I was really had the honor to inaugurate just last month is the next phase of hydrogen production, so an electrolyzer being integrated. They started to use this as an additional storage when they have energy in excess to produce hydrogen, which is then being used as a source of energy for some surrounding industries in the area. They will also have a fuel station for trucks and perhaps later also for cars using this. So it's an incredible journey. And we are kind of partnering with them and then take some learnings and then carry it out into the world to have more Wunsiedels also around the globe.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I think we might have to organise a delegation visit to that one.
Absolutely.
And we'll stop off at the microbreweries on the way, Bronwyn. I want to close with a question to everyone here on the panel today. The audience that we have with us are Australia's engineers, and these are the people that are critically important to the future of these projects and solving these problems. And we're talking about artificial intelligence and digital twins and Industry 4.0 and BIM and all of these different things. What advice would you give to engineers that exist today, that are listening to this today? What advice would you give about the mindset that they have to have, or the skills, or the learning?
So I'll start. It's okay not to know the answer right now, but what I would advise is have that growth mindset, have that approach to, I'm curious, I want to learn, I want to see what it means for me. So I would say for the engineers out there, be curious, do some research, go and find out how you can be involved, put your hand up. You'll only learn more about these areas if you start to explore them. They're not going to be an innate quality. So if you're an engineer, you're in the perfect place to be part of the future. And now it's in your hands to do something about being part of that future.
Yeah, down the same line, growth mindset. Don't get to a certain level where you're sort of tapping out and saying, oh, I know enough, I'm just going to do my job for the next 10 to 15 years. Challenge yourself, work for an organisation, and maybe it's a bit of a plug here from Siemens, that is going to provide opportunities to even embrace new technologies or even to work overseas. I can vouch for that. It's an organisation that can accommodate you, but growth mindset's the key.
Yeah, so curiosity and growth mindset. And I would also add to this some kind of simplicity. So even though I'm an engineer myself, and sometimes normally engineers try to make it as complex as possible to prove something, right? We need to be faster, we need speed, and therefore scalability is of the essence. So therefore we need fast, scalable, simple solutions, and that is, step by step, and which also fits to the agile approach of the. So I would like to add to curiosity, growth mindset, agility, and that must be the three topics.
That kind of, for me, that sums up. We opened with the conversation on adaptable infrastructure, but now it's kind of connected very much to adaptable people. So I think that's a nice way to finish today. I'd like to thank you very much for your time, panelists and guests. Also, thank you to the audience. Thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again. And thanks to Engineers Australia. Thank you.